it's Tanya, and today I wanted to do something a little bit different than normal. I wanted to tell you one of the stories that I find very interesting. Some people think of it as a conspiracy. Some people think of it as a true crime that actually happened. And I wanted to do some research to see what I could find. This story has always kind of blown my mind. And the story that I'm going to talk about is Giulia Tofana. And I first heard about her through Bailey Sarian, and I haven't really heard it from anybody else or any other YouTubers that I normally watch, so I wondered if it was just not a big researched story, or some people question if it's true or not. So let's kind of get into it. Giulia Tofana was actually, in my opinion, I would call her the queen of poison, because she was known for actually killing hundreds of men, and actually a lot of women were in on it. And that kind of blows my mind that it could kind of fly under the radar long enough that that many people could be killed. So she just kind of sticks out in my mind. If that's true and she did kill hundreds of men, then that would make her one of the most prolific serial killers that, is known today. Which, again, I personally can't tell you if it's a true story or if it's conspiracy, but that's a lot of people, and the reasons behind it just kind of blow my mind. Now, in my research, information was kind of hard to come by. And some resources were saying that some of the information can be backed up by journal entries made around the era of her lifetime. And so I obviously don't have my hands on those journals, but I think that kind of leads me to believe it's more true, potentially. So let's see if you believe it's a conspiracy or a murder mystery. So not a lot is known about Giulia's family, but Giulia Tofana was born in 1620, and there's speculation on who her mother was. From most sources I could find, her mother was known to be Tofania de Adamu. And I'm sure I butchered that, but I'll put her name here so you can see. If this was her mother, she was actually killed for poisoning her own husband, and people speculate that maybe she passed on her poison recipe to her daughter. Not much else is known about Giulia's family other than she had a daughter as well. In Giulia's early life, she actually spent a lot of time in apothecaries, and she learned how to make things like medicines and potions. Some people think that she learned the poison from her mother, and some people think that she learned it from working and being around the apothecaries. So August 26th is Women's Equality Day, and I just wanted to paint the scene of what being a woman looked like at that time. And just a heads up, we're talking about Italy during the Renaissance. She was born in Italy, and those times looked a lot different than today, obviously. This was a time when men were in control and women had no legal rights. So they legally belonged to their husbands. Women at the time could only have a couple jobs. They could be married, they could bake, they could become a prostitute, or they could become a nun. So there wasn't many options for them at the time. In this time, there were a lot of arranged marriage, and people weren't exactly married for love. They were married basically to be childbearers, and that's the expectation of their daily life. They didn't really get to have a choice in the matter. It was either you're married or you're becoming a prostitute, basically. So women were kind of trapped in sometimes not great marriages. Sadly, in a lot of situations, there was a lot of mistreatment of women, and a lot of women were abused. Divorce wasn't really an option at the time. I believe the Catholic Church was very against that, and so if you were in an abusive relationship, you kind of were stuck in it unless you wanted to face the repercussions of the church and the society around them. Julia was actually employed at the time. She actually had a job. She opened a makeup counter, and she had many different products that women could come and purchase. So beautifying themselves for their husbands and for the people of society in the day. And people loved it. It was great products. It had, variety. And there was actually a secret version of the makeup that not everybody did know about. It only select people knew, and it was called Aqua Tofana. Aqua Tofana was actually a poison, believe it or not, and it was disguised as a normal makeup product. It looked like everything else. It was kind of a secret disguised makeup. It was disguised really well because she didn't want it getting out that, ooh, it's poison. And what would people use this poison for, you ask? Well, it was actually used to poison women's husbands that were abusing them. The makeup came in a couple different options. I believe it was a powder, it was a face cream, and it came in little vials that women could give to their husbands. It had to be disguised so that nobody would expect that it was a poison. It would just look like a normal piece of makeup sitting around the house. It was known as a healing ointment or to cover blemishes up. And it had a lot of ingredients at the time that were normal in normal makeup. So in the ingredients list, it looked like a normal makeup. I looked up some of the recipe ingredients, and I'm gonna kind of read them off because I can't quite remember all of them since I'm not a scientist. The first ingredient was belladonna, and it helped with sleeplessness and pain, and it was a common ingredient for a love potion. And there was also berry juice. They sometimes would actually put belladonna in their eyes at the time so that it would make their pupils bigger, because that's what was the beauty trend of the time. That was hot at the time. And they also had arsenic, lead, and arsenic is actually used a lot to lighten skin at the time, and they didn't realize it was actually dangerous until later in life. But a lot of these things were impossible to detect because toxicology wasn't really a thing yet. It was tasteless and colorless, so it kind of flew right under the radar. So how did women learn about Aqua Tofana at the time? It was actually only known by word of mouth, and it was very secretive because if you think about it, women are killing their husbands, with this miracle makeup. And I mean, they didn't want to narc on Aqua Tofana because that means they're going down too if it gets found out. So they were very protective of Giulia during this time, and she was very protective of her clients because, like I said, if she's going down, they're all going down. So like I said, it was only advertised by word of mouth. And so Giulia had to trust the people that were advertising this to other women. And so it was kind of a whole process to get this miracle quick solution to a woman's problems. The woman had to be very trustworthy, and Giulia would pretty much coach them on what to do after they got this makeup, Aqua Tofana. She would coach them on what to do, how to act, etc. She would also teach them how to give this poison to their husbands so it didn't look too suspicious. So how would this poison work exactly? How do we go about using this makeup version of a poison? So the women were given this substance, however it was, and they were taught to put this into their husband's food or drink. So their meatloaf that they made that night, or that wine that they were drinking, or whatever. And it actually was tasteless and odorless, so the husband would not suspect anything. The poison would act like a advancing sickness. So after the first dose, they would just feel a cold-like symptoms. After the second and third-ish dose, the husband would start feeling sick. So they would be vomiting, they would be having diarrhea, stomach upset-like symptoms. And by the fourth dose, they would be dead. It would kill them. They were taught that after the second/third dose, that they needed to call the medicine man and act very concerned for their husband's welfare and have the medicine man check him out, give him some kind of tonic, give him a medicine, and, be on their merry way. The doctor would be like, all right, you're gonna pass this. You're gonna be fine, whatever. And, go on their merry way. So then the doctor would be called out, 1-2 times, and it would really confuse the doctors after the fourth dose because they would die. And they'd be like, what's happening? What the heck is happening? But, back in the day, medicine wasn't the way that it is today. And there was nothing conclusively known about different, diseases and everything. And eventually the doctors would just see it as the man had died of natural causes. What else could have caused this? It's kind of out of nowhere. And then again, the women had been trained, and so they were required to ask the doctors/medical personnel for an autopsy. And so once, they autopsied the body, they wouldn't find anything because, it was a poison. It was tasteless, odorless, and they didn't have any testing back then to be able to find traces, as well as a lot of the stuff in there wouldn't have had any traces. After that autopsy, the wife would look innocent. She didn't do anything wrong. She very much cared for her husband. This is what happened for all of Giulia Tofana's clients that wanted Aqua Tofana. They were taught to do this exact same thing, and they, their husbands looked like they died of natural causes. And so, that's the norm of Aqua Tofana. How did it all come to an end? How was she figured out? And I believe it was 1650. Yeah, in the 1650s, a new lady had bought the product, and so she was going and giving this product to her husband, and she put some drops of this poison in his soup, and she gave it to him, and then she panicked. She was like, don't eat that, don't eat that. And she was second guessing herself, and the husband was like, what would you put in it then? What's wrong with it? He beat her and asked her what's in this soup, and then he took her to authorities, and they actually tortured her, and they figured out it was Aqua Tofana. But after this torture, I couldn't figure out if she died or not from the torture. That was unclear in my resources. So word gets to Giulia that they had a narc in their midst, and so she has to kind of go on the run. She has to hide. So she goes to this church for sanctuary to hide from, authorities, from the raging public of men with pitchforks and javelins, and I don't know what they had at that time. They had things that they were, complaining about, and, they were mad. People had been dying. Rumors start swirling and saying that she poisoned the entire water system and that she was, this crazed lunatic out to kill all men. And so the people go to the church and start, requiring this church, saying you have to give her to us. You have to do this. This is, otherwise we're gonna burn you down or do things that you're not gonna like. So this church gives her over to the mob that had shown up on their outskirts, and they actually, tortured her to try to get names of what wives and who all was involved in this ring of Aqua Tofana, and she was tortured until she gave a confession. During this time of her confession, she said that she had killed around 600 men from 1633 to 1651, and she may have exaggerated because she was being tortured, but it could also be true. We wouldn't know because the circumstances, kind of aggressive. But they could have also exaggerated it by the authorities putting words in her mouth. But anyway, it boils down to she names some clients, and they're tortured, and they name some other clients, and this witch hunt basically enacts, and they're looking for all these people that could have murdered their husbands because they were themselves being abused, and all of this bad stuff was happening to them, so they wanted out, but they were killed for it. In, I believe, 1659, she was executed along with her daughter and some of the employees that worked for her in the Campo de Fiori. To make matters worse, her body was actually thrown into the area of that church that was, trying to protect her for a time. And so it was kind of a slap in the face to the church that was trying to help her out for a while. In regards to her clients, I know a lot of them were punished, a lot were executed. A lot of them acted like they didn't know anything about it, so then they wouldn't get killed or tortured themselves. They just had this makeup product. They didn't know it could kill anybody. What? That's crazy. What you talking about? It was hard to find out, who was who actually had the product because they were going to kill their husband, who had it just as a makeup product, and, a lot of the lower class were just executed, just get rid of them. They're low class anyway, whatever. And then the upper class were either imprisoned or banished from the area. Oh, I also read this thing where some of them were bricked into dungeons. So they would put them in this dungeon, and then they would put bricks in and brick them in to the building. So think of a brick house, they brick them in to their jail cell, basically. That's gotta be brutal. I wrote it down. The Palace of Holy Office is where that took place. And also a lot just got away with it. So, I don't know, I feel like those are some varying things that happened to these women, where either you got off scot-free and you just got rid of your husband, or you were tortured, killed, or bricked into your jail cell. Oof. There were some other outlooks from historians that I found. I'm gonna read some of them because I kind of forget all of them word for word. So some historians say that she actually died in her sleep in 1651, and that nobody really knew of her crimes, and all of this was just a story made up. Some think that she was innocent and she was just selling cosmetics at the time. And like I said towards the beginning, women weren't really allowed to have jobs other than being a prostitute, a nun, being married, that type of thing. And so she was out of the ordinary. So she was someone to place blame on. It was also a common time to have witch hunts anyway. So they were kind of looking for anybody out of the ordinary in general. Also, I couldn't find if she was married. I know she had a daughter, but if she wasn't married at the time, that would look really sketchy to them as well, because you were married at that time. That was the way the world worked. You were married and you basically belonged to your husband. Some people thought that she was just this, hero saving these women from bad relationships where they were being abused and in some cases even killed. Some people think that she's just this cold-blooded murderer, and I'm not exactly sure where I stand on this. I don't think that murder is okay, obviously. Nobody should, please don't. But I can see where she's coming from in a time where you're kind of locked in, that's the way that the world worked, and you might be locked into this relationship where you're constantly being abused. I could see where her heart could, you know, melt for these women that were in these awful situations and seeing like there's no other way out, so this is a way for them to, you know, get their husband's estate and kind of live off of it. I don't know, to me it seems like at the time women just had it rough. Like, it sounds awful. And again, I might be painting the picture wrong because I'm not from that time, so I can't really speak to it. I don't know, it makes me sad that, you know, that was the only way out for some people. I imagine that still exists. Like, there's no way out for women who are being abused, neglected, mistreated. And it's not as easy as just leaving at times. You know, you have financial stuckness. I don't know the word for that. Like, you are stuck financially. Like, this person has completely kind of cut you off from the world around you. You have kids with the person, and, you know, leaving might endanger your children. And you know, my heart goes out to anybody that's in a situation like that. It also blows my mind the potential that she killed around 600 men. Again, I don't know if she was tortured and like she just came up with that figure, or if that was actually true, but that is crazy if it is true. I can't imagine. I guess technically she didn't put the poison in their mouths, but she created the poison. So that, you know, makes her at least an accomplice at the least. So yeah, I don't know, what do you think? Comment below, because this one has always kind of blown my mind. I can't imagine, you know, first of all, living in those times, but also like having to keep the secret of like many women. Think about it though, she killed 600 men, that means 600 women killed their husbands. Oof, that had to be rough. Also, I did not get all the information, I'm positive. So if you know anything else about this that I didn't include, or that you know that I had no idea about, put that in the comments too, because I'd love to learn more about this story. Or if you do your own research, put other links to other information below. I'm gonna put mine below that I found, but I just think it's a really cool story, and I think that that's the summary is what. So my tip of the day, if you're mad at your spouse, don't just kill them. Go to some counseling, or nowadays you can get a divorce. I know, you know, some scenarios aren't that easy, but maybe don't take it that far. There's other ways to get around it. Seems highly unnecessary. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that you have a wonderful day. Don't talk to strangers unless they give you candy. And I'll see you in the next video next time. Bye! Aqua Tofana.